The clock on Maya Thompson's dashboard showed 11:43 p.m. as she drove her black Honda Civic through the quiet streets of downtown Harrison City. The night shift at Memorial Hospital had been long, filled with the usual mix of emergencies and routine care that kept her cover as a registered nurse believable. What none of her coworkers knew was that behind her gentle smile and caring demeanor lay the sharp mind of a federal investigator with 15 years of experience bringing down corruption rings. Maya adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her tired face. At 42, she had mastered the art of blending in, wearing simple scrubs and minimal makeup that made her look like any other hardworking healthcare worker. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her only jewelry was a simple silver necklace, though few would guess it contained a tiny recording device. The streets were almost empty at this hour. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and the occasional late-night worker hurried past closed storefronts. Maya's mind wandered to the evidence she'd gathered over the past 6 months. The pattern was becoming clear. A troubling number of successful black professionals in Harrison City had been arrested on suspicious drug charges, their careers and lives destroyed by convictions that seemed to follow the same script every time. Lost in thought, she'd almost missed the police cruiser that pulled out behind her. Maya's trained eye noticed it immediately in her mirror, Unit 437, one of the vehicles she'd been watching. Her fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but her face remained calm. She'd been a federal agent too long to show any reaction. At the next red light, Maya came to a complete stop. She watched as a second police cruiser suddenly appeared, pulling up alongside her. Her heart rate remained steady. This was exactly the kind of scenario she'd been waiting for. She knew Officers Plant and Reynolds were working tonight. Their patterns had become predictable to her after months of surveillance. The light turned green, but before Maya could move, flashing blue and red lights filled her mirrors. The police radio crackled loudly enough for her to hear. "Dispatch, we've got a possible match on that drug trafficking suspect. Black female, black Honda Civic." Maya took a slow, deep breath. This was the moment her team had been preparing for. She carefully moved her hand to her hospital ID badge, making sure its hidden camera had a clear view. The body cam footage from these officers had a suspicious habit of going missing during controversial arrests. The first officer approached her window, flashlight beam intentionally hitting her eyes. Maya recognized Officer Plant's voice, dripping with fake authority. "Ma'am, turn off your vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them." Maya complied perfectly, her movements slow and deliberate. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. "We've had reports of drug trafficking in the area," Officer Reynolds said, appearing on the passenger side. His hand rested too eagerly on his weapon. "Your vehicle matches the description of a suspect's car." Maya noticed how Reynolds kept glancing at her hospital ID badge with barely hidden disdain. She knew what they saw: another successful black woman they could tear down, another career they could destroy. They had no idea they were walking right into a federal investigation. "I'm just heading home from my shift at Memorial," Maya said, using the tired voice of someone who'd spent 12 hours on their feet. "I'm a registered nurse there." "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," Plant ordered, his tone making the respectful words sound like an insult. "We're going to need to search your car." Maya's mind raced through the proper procedures they were already violating. No probable cause, no warrant, no real reason for the stop. As she carefully opened her door, she caught a glimpse of Officer Reynolds moving toward her trunk, his partner deliberately positioning himself to block her view. She stood calmly on the sidewalk, fighting back a small smile as she heard the faint click of her hidden camera recording everything. These officers had done this so many times before, destroying lives with their planted evidence and falsified reports. But tonight was different. Tonight, they were finally providing the evidence that would expose their entire corrupt operation. What Officers Plant and Reynolds didn't know as they began their search was that every move they made was being documented. They had no idea that the quiet nurse they targeted was about to become their worst nightmare. Maya Thompson stood silently in the cool night air, playing the role of a worried victim perfectly, while inside she was already composing the first paragraphs of what would become a devastating federal indictment. Officer Plant circled Maya's Honda Civic like a hungry wolf, his flashlight beam dancing across the clean exterior. The midnight air had grown colder, but Maya didn't shiver. She stood perfectly still on the sidewalk, watching as Officer Reynolds made a show of calling in their stop to dispatch. Neither officer wore their body cameras, exactly as she'd expected. "Pop the trunk," Plant ordered, not bothering to hide his smirk. When Maya pressed the button on her key fob, the trunk opened with a soft click. She noticed how Reynolds quickly moved to block her view, his broad shoulders creating a convenient screen for whatever Plant was doing back there. Maya heard the familiar sounds of her trunk being searched, shuffling, movement, the thud of her emergency medical kit being pushed aside. Then came the sound she'd been waiting for, the slight rustle of a plastic bag being removed from a pocket. Her hidden camera caught everything as Plant made a dramatic show of discovering a package wrapped in black plastic. Well, what do we have here?" Plant's voice carried false surprise as he held up the package. "Looks like we got ourselves a nurse who's delivering more than just medical care." Reynolds grabbed Maya's arm, his fingers digging in harder than necessary. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Maya complied, maintaining her role as a scared nurse perfectly. "That's not mine," she protested, letting her voice shake just enough. "I don't know where that came from." "They'd all say that," Reynolds laughed, roughly snapping handcuffs around her wrists. The metal bit into her skin, but Maya knew every bruise would be more evidence. As Reynolds patted her down with inappropriate thoroughness, Plant was already calling in their discovery to dispatch. "Suspect found in possession of approximately 500 grams of what appears to be cocaine," Plant reported, making sure his voice carried to where Maya stood. "High-grade stuff, too. Looks like someone's been using their hospital access to move product." Maya let tears fill her eyes, real ones, though not for the reasons the officers assumed. She thought about all the other innocent people these corrupt cops had destroyed, all the lives they'd ruined with their planted evidence and false arrests. Her own discomfort was worth it to finally bring them to justice. At the police station, the humiliation tactics began. They left Maya sitting in the interview room for hours, her requests for water ignored. Through the two-way mirror, she could hear them laughing, proudly congratulating themselves on another successful frame-up. When they finally entered to interview her, Plant carried a thick file folder. "Maya Thompson," he read, his tone mocking. "Registered nurse at Memorial Hospital. No prior arrests. Guess there's a first time for everything, right?" "I want a lawyer," Maya said firmly, just as any innocent person would. "Oh, you'll need one," Reynolds sneered, dropping a stack of forms on the table. "Sign here to acknowledge the drugs we found in your possession." Maya looked at the forms, noting how they'd already filled in most details: weight, purity, estimated street value, all perfectly matching the pattern she'd documented in dozens of other false arrests. "I'm not signing anything without a lawyer present." Plant leaned forward, his breath smelling of coffee and satisfaction. "Listen here, nurse. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Right now, you're looking at possession with intent to distribute. That's 15 years minimum. Sign the forms, cooperate, maybe the DA cuts you a deal." Maya let more tears fall, playing her part. "Please," she whispered. "I have a career, a life. I help people. Should've thought about that before you started pushing drugs," Reynolds said. He turned to Plant. "Call Judge Harrison. They'll know how to handle this one." The officers left her alone again, confident in their power. Through the thin walls, Maya could hear them making calls, setting their corrupt machine in motion. What they didn't know was that every word, every action, every abuse of power was being recorded. Her hidden camera had captured the planted evidence, and the recording device in her necklace was catching every conversation. Sitting in the harsh fluorescent light of the interview room, Maya Thompson allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Officers Plant and Reynolds thought they were destroying another innocent life. Instead, they were finally providing the evidence that would destroy their entire corrupt operation. All she had to do now was wait. 3 days after her arrest, Maya Thompson sat in courtroom 4B of the Harrison City Courthouse. The hard wooden bench pressed uncomfortably against her back as she watched Judge Richard Harrison enter the room. At 65, with steel-gray hair and cold blue eyes, Harrison had a reputation for being merciless, especially with defendants of color. Maya knew his track record well. It was one of the reasons she'd chosen this jurisdiction for her investigation. Her court-appointed lawyer, Dennis Weber, shuffled papers beside her. Weber was exactly what officers Plant and Reynolds had hoped for: overworked, underprepared, and more interested in plea deals than justice. What they didn't know was that Maya had specifically requested him, knowing his reputation for missing obvious defense strategies would make her look more vulnerable. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Harrison took his seat, his black robe settling around him like dark wings. His eyes swept the courtroom, pausing briefly on Maya. She saw the slight curl of his lip, the quick glance he shared with Officer Plant, who stood at the back of the courtroom. Case number 2025 CR 1443, State versus Maya Thompson, the clerk announced. Charges are possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, a class of felony. Judge Harrison peered at Maya over his reading glasses. "How does the defendant plead?" Weber stood up, his tie slightly crooked. "Not guilty, Your Honor." "Bail hearing will commence," Harrison declared, though Maya could tell from his tone that his mind was already made up. The hidden recording device in her necklace picked up every word as the prosecutor, Sarah Martinez, stepped forward. "Your Honor, the state requests bail be set at $2 million, Martinez announced. The defendant was found in possession of a significant amount of high-grade cocaine. Her position as a nurse gives her access to medical facilities, making her a flight risk. Weber's defense was predictably weak. "Your Honor, my client has no prior record. She's a respected nurse with deep ties to the community. We request release on her own recognizance." Maya watched the performance unfold, noting how Judge Harrison pretended to consider both sides. Through her hidden camera, she captured the subtle signals between Harrison and Officer Plant: a slight nod, a quick hand gesture. These were the small details that would later help prove their coordination. "Bail is set at $1 million, Harrison announced, bringing down his gavel with unnecessary force. "Next hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from today." As the bailiff led Maya away, she caught snippets of a whispered conversation between Officer Plant and Judge Harrison's clerk. Money would change hands later that day. She knew her team was already tracking the offshore accounts where Harrison hid his bribes. Back in her holding cell, Maya sat quietly while Weber explained her options. "Listen, Miss Thompson," he said, not meeting her eyes. "The evidence against you is strong. Judge Harrison has a 98% conviction rate on drug cases. If you plead guilty now, we might get 10 years instead of 15. Maya let her voice tremble. "But I'm innocent. Those drugs weren't mine." Weber sighed, exactly as she'd expected. "They were found in your car. Your fingerprints were on the package." "Of course they were." Plant had made sure of that while she was handcuffed, pressing her fingers against the plastic bag when he thought no one was watching. Her hidden camera had caught that too. "What about security cameras?" Maya asked. "There must have been some at that intersection." "All malfunctioning that night," Weber replied, shuffling his papers again. "Look, I've seen this before." Judge Harrison doesn't look kindly on defendants who waste the court's time. Maya buried her face in her hands, appearing to cry while hiding her small smile. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. That evening, as she was returned to her cell, she heard Officer Reynolds talking to another cop. "Judge Harrison's gonna make an example of this one," Reynolds laughed. "Says he's tired of these uppity professionals thinking they can get away with anything. Called in a favor with the DA too. No deals offered." Maya lay on her thin prison mattress, mentally recording every detail. In her years as a federal investigator, she brought down drug cartels and exposed corporate fraud. But this case was different. This wasn't just about crime. It was about systematic corruption that destroyed innocent lives through the very system meant to protect them. Tomorrow, her real legal team would begin the next phase of the operation. But for tonight, Maya Thompson played her role perfectly. Just another victim of a corrupt system that was about to learn it had finally targeted the wrong person. A week after her bail hearing, Maya Thompson walked through the quiet halls of Memorial Hospital's night shift, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. Her mother had borrowed against her house to post bail, playing perfectly into Maya's cover story. What Officers Plant and Reynolds didn't know was that the bail money had actually come from the FBI's operation budget. Maya stopped at the nurse's station, pretending to check patient charts while actually reviewing a hidden file on her tablet. Her colleague, Sarah Chen, approached with concern in her eyes. I still can't believe they arrested you, Sarah whispered, setting down her coffee. You're like the most honest person I know. Maya gave a sad smile, using the conversation to scan the hallway. The worst part is, I'm not the only one. Remember Dr. Jackson from cardiology? Sarah's eyes widened. Lisa Jackson? The one who lost her medical license last year. Same officers, same judge, Maya said quietly, noting how another nurse, Keisha Williams, had moved closer to listen. I've been doing some research since I got out on bail. There's a pattern. Keisha glanced around before speaking. My sister's friend, Angela, she was a bank manager. Same thing happened to her 6 months ago. Officers found drugs in her car during a random stop. Judge Harrison gave her 12 years. This was exactly what Maya had been waiting for. She let her voice shake slightly. How many others are there? Throughout her shift, Maya collected stories. A real estate agent, a corporate lawyer, a high school principal, all successful black women, all arrested by officers Plant and Reynolds, all sentenced by Judge Harrison. Her hidden camera captured every conversation, building a pattern that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. During her lunch break, Maya sat in her car, pretending to eat while actually transmitting data to her FBI team. Her tablet showed the financial trails they'd uncovered. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, wire transfers disguised as business investments, property bought through shell companies. Judge Harrison's corruption went deeper than anyone had suspected. A police cruiser rolled slowly through the hospital parking lot. Officer Reynolds doing his nightly intimidation drive-by. Maya appeared to shrink in her seat, but her hidden camera captured everything, including the way Reynolds spoke into his radio with a smirk. Back inside, Maya visited the hospital's records department. Under the guise of checking old patient files, she accessed employment records of former staff members who'd been arrested. The pattern was clear. Each victim had been at the height of their career. Each arrest had seemed perfectly timed to destroy not just their freedom, but their professional reputation. Ms. Thompson? A voice made her jump. It was Dr. Martinez, the chief of surgery. I heard about your situation. The hospital board is meeting tomorrow to discuss your employment. Maya let tears fill her eyes. Please, I need this job. I'm innocent. Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable. Judge Harrison called personally. He said keeping you employed would look bad for the hospital. Perfect. Another piece of evidence showing Harrison's reach beyond the courtroom. Maya's recording devices captured everything as Dr. Martinez explained how the judge had suggested that employing someone awaiting trial would jeopardize their upcoming license review. That evening, as her shift ended, Maya received a text from a burner phone. Her real legal team had found 3 more victims in nearby counties. Same officers, same judge, same pattern of destroyed careers and suspicious financial transactions. In the parking lot, Maya spotted Officer Plant talking to a security guard, pointing at her car. She pretended not to notice, but her camera caught their entire conversation about setting up extra surveillance on her suspicious activities. Driving home, Maya took a different route than usual, making sure she wasn't followed. Her mind processed everything she'd learned. The corruption wasn't just about drugs and bribes. It was about power and systematic destruction. Plant, Reynolds, and Harrison weren't just dirty cops and a corrupt judge. They were part of a larger machine that targeted successful black women, using the legal system itself as a weapon. As she parked in her driveway, Maya noticed a new car across the street. Through her rearview mirror, she saw the driver watching her house, another of Harrison's intimidation tactics. But what they saw as fear in her cautious movements was actually careful documentation. Every photo they took of her, every attempt to frighten her, only added to the mountain of evidence she was building. Tomorrow, she would meet secretly with her FBI team to plan the next phase. But tonight, Maya Thompson, the nurse under investigation, the preliminary hearing room was packed as Maya Thompson sat beside her court-appointed lawyer, Dennis Weber. 2 weeks had passed since her arrest, and everything was about to change. Weber shuffled through his messy papers, unaware that his apparent incompetence was about to serve a greater purpose. Officer Plant sat at the prosecution's table, looking smug in his pressed uniform. Officer Reynolds stood at the back of the room, as always. Judge Harrison peered down from his bench, his face showing the same cold confidence he'd shown to countless other innocent women before Maya. "Your Honor," Weber began, his tie crooked as usual. "The defense would like to present evidence regarding the night of Miss Thompson's arrest." Judge Harrison sighed with obvious annoyance. "Proceed, Mr. Weber." Weber fumbled with his briefcase, dropping several papers on the floor. As he bent to pick them up, Maya noticed Officer Plant's slight smirk, but the smirk faded when Weber pulled out a thick folder labeled traffic camera records. "Your Honor," Weber said, his voice surprisingly steady, "we've obtained footage from the traffic cameras at the intersection where my client was arrested." Officer Plant's face tightened. Reynolds straightened up at the back of the room. Judge Harrison's hand gripped his gavel a little tighter. "Objection, Your Honor." The prosecutor jumped in. "We were informed all cameras in that area were malfunctioning that night." Weber blinked innocently. "Oh, not the city cameras, Your Honor. I'm referring to the private security cameras from the new bank building on that corner. They were installed last month. Their footage shows everything that happened during Miss Thompson's arrest." Maya kept her eyes down, hiding her satisfaction as she watched Officer Plant's leg begin to bounce nervously under the table. Through her hidden camera, she captured his quick glance at Reynolds, who had pulled out his phone and was typing frantically. Furthermore, Weber continued, "These records show Officer Plant approaching my client's trunk exactly 17 seconds before calling in the discovery of drugs. Barely enough time to open the trunk, let alone conduct a thorough search." Judge Harrison's face had turned slightly red. "Mr. Weber, this evidence wasn't properly submitted during discovery." "My apologies, Your Honor," Weber said, dropping more papers. "I only received these files this morning. I also have some interesting bank records that came with them." The word bank made Judge Harrison's hand freeze on his gavel. Officer Plant was now openly staring at Reynolds, who had slipped out of the courtroom door. "This is highly irregular," the prosecutor protested. "We need time to review this new evidence." "Of course," Weber agreed, somehow managing to knock over his water glass while spreading out more papers. "While we're reviewing things, I also found some interesting connections between offshore accounts and recent property purchases in the Caribbean." Maya watched as Judge Harrison's face went from red to pale. She could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to figure out how this bumbling defense lawyer had stumbled onto his secret accounts. "This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow," Harrison announced abruptly, standing up. "All parties need time to properly review this new evidence." As people began filing out, Maya observed Officer Plant cornering Weber in the hallway. "Where did you get those bank records?" Plant demanded, his voice low and threatening. Weber dropped his briefcase again, papers scattering everywhere. "Oh, they just came in the mail. Anonymous source. Very interesting reading, especially the parts about regular deposits matching dates of certain arrests." Plant grabbed his radio, barking orders to find Reynolds. Through the courthouse windows, Maya could see Reynolds in the parking lot, making frantic phone calls. In the bathroom, Maya heard two clerks whispering. "Judge Harrison just canceled all his afternoon appointments. He's on the phone with his lawyer." Everything was falling apart for them, exactly as planned. Weber wasn't just an overworked public defender. He was a skilled federal prosecutor who had been waiting months to play this role. Every fumbled paper, every dropped file had been carefully choreographed to make him seem harmless until this moment. That evening, Maya sat in her FBI team's secret office, watching surveillance footage of the aftermath. Plant and Reynolds had spent hours shredding documents in their precinct. Judge Harrison had made 3 separate trips to his bank. All of them had fallen into the trap, their panicked reactions only providing more evidence of their guilt. "They'll try to cover it up," one of her team members said. Maya nodded, finally allowing herself a small smile. "Let them try. Every move they make now will only dig them deeper." Sometimes the best way to catch corrupt people is to let them think they're winning, right until the moment they realize they've lost everything. The next morning, courtroom 4B was filled beyond capacity. Word had spread about yesterday's dramatic hearing, and now everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Maya Thompson sat quietly at the defense table, still wearing her nurse's scrubs. Officer Plant and Reynolds stood near the back doors, their faces tense. Judge Harrison entered, his usual confidence replaced by barely hidden concern. "Before we continue with yesterday's evidence, Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying a slight tremor. The court has received a motion to dismiss all charges based on lack of evidence. Maya watched as her clumsy lawyer, Weber, stood up. Gone was his crooked tie and messy paperwork. Today, he stood straight and professional, every inch the federal prosecutor he truly was. Your Honor, Weber said clearly, before you rule on that motion, the defense would like to introduce one final piece of evidence. Judge Harrison's hand tightened on his gavel. Make it quick, Mr. Weber. Weber nodded to Maya, who slowly stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce the court to my client's true identity. He pulled out an FBI badge. This is Special Agent Maya Thompson, lead investigator for the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Officer Plant's face went white. Reynolds grabbed for the door handle, but it wouldn't open. Federal agents had already quietly secured all exits. This is ridiculous, Judge Harrison sputtered, banging his gavel. I won't allow this theatrical. Actually, Your Honor. A new voice rang out. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen, Maya's former fellow nurse, walked into the courtroom, followed by a team of FBI agents. This court is now under federal jurisdiction. Maya removed her simple silver necklace, holding up the sophisticated recording device it contained. For the past 6 months, I've documented every illegal action, every planted piece of evidence, every bribe accepted by this court. Officer Plant made a dash for the side door, but found 2 FBI agents waiting. Reynolds had already been handcuffed, his face showing the shock of someone who suddenly realized he'd been played. This is outrageous. Judge Harrison stood up, his face purple with rage. I am a federal judge. And I am a federal agent. Maya cut in, her voice strong and clear. One who has gathered extensive evidence of your participation in a criminal conspiracy to wrongfully convict innocent citizens. The hidden camera in her badge had been recording everything. Now, a court officer set up a projection screen, and Maya's team began playing selected clips. Plant and Reynolds planting drugs in her trunk. Judge Harrison discussing bribes in his chambers. Reynolds threatening previous victims. Offshore account numbers being exchanged. Conversations about targeting successful black women. Over the past 3 years, Maya announced to the stunned courtroom, your organization has wrongfully convicted 37 women. You destroyed their careers, their reputations, their lives. You thought you were untouchable. Weber stepped forward, now flanked by more federal agents. Richard Harrison, Michael Plant, James Reynolds, you are under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, evidence tampering, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights under color of law. As federal agents moved to handcuff Judge Harrison, he stared at Maya with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You were just a nurse. Maya smiled for the first time since her arrest 2 weeks ago. That's exactly what you were supposed to think. Your biggest mistake was assuming that a successful black woman must be guilty of something. Your second biggest mistake was not realizing that we've been watching you for months. The courtroom had become a scene of organized chaos. FBI agents were securing evidence, reading rights, and handcuffing not just the judge and officers, but also court clerks and other police officers who had been part of the conspiracy. Through it all, Maya stood tall, finally dropping the scared nurse act she'd maintained for so long. As she watched Harrison, Plant, and Reynolds being led away in handcuffs, she thought about all the women they had wrongfully convicted. This was just the beginning. Her team would now begin the process of reviewing every case these corrupt officials had touched. Agent Thompson, Sarah Chen called from the doorway. The press is outside. Would you like to make a statement? Maya gathered her files, including the detailed evidence that would free dozens of innocent women. Yes, she said firmly. It's time to tell the whole story. It's time for justice to finally work the way it's supposed to. 2 weeks after the dramatic courthouse arrests, Maya Thompson sat in the FBI's field office, surrounded by walls covered in photos, documents, and connection maps. What had started as an investigation into 3 corrupt officials had exploded into something much bigger. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story hit the news. Agent Thompson, her assistant, called from the doorway. Another victim has come forward. Dr. Patricia Williams, convicted in 2022. Same pattern. Plant and Reynolds made the arrest. Harrison handled the case. Maya nodded, adding another photo to the wall. Dr. Williams had been a prominent surgeon before her arrest. Now she was serving 15 years in state prison. Add her file to the review pile, and get me the transcripts from her trial. The investigation had revealed a corruption network that went far beyond Harrison City. Maya's team had uncovered similar patterns in 3 neighboring counties. The same offshore accounts that had received Judge Harrison's bribes had also made payments to 2 other judges, 4 police captains, and even a state prosecutor. The money trail goes back 12 years, FBI forensic accountant James Chen explained, spreading financial documents across Maya's desk. We've identified over $20 million in bribes, all carefully hidden through shell companies and fake business investments. Maya studied the documents, her trained eye catching details others might miss. Look at these dates, she pointed out. Every major payment corresponds to a high-profile arrest of a successful black woman. They weren't just corrupt, they were specifically targeting women who had beaten the odds and achieved success. Down the hall, in a large conference room, former victims gathered daily to share their stories. Lisa Jackson, the cardiologist Maya had mentioned at the hospital, was there. So was Angela Baker, the bank manager, and dozens of others. Each story followed the same pattern, a successful career destroyed by planted evidence and rushed convictions. We found evidence of judicial misconduct in over 300 cases, Sarah Chen reported, now openly working as a federal prosecutor. Judge Harrison was manipulating evidence, pressuring witnesses, and fast-tracking convictions. The entire system was rigged. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her undercover team. They just arrested 2 more police officers who had worked with Plant and Reynolds. The officers were already talking, hoping to make deals. Each new arrest led to more revelations, more names, more corrupt officials. The State Bar Association is reviewing every lawyer involved in these cases, Weber announced, walking in with a fresh stack of files. They've already suspended 3 prosecutors who worked closely with Harrison. 2 of them are cooperating with our investigation. The corruption had spread like a cancer through the justice system. Maya's team discovered that Harrison and his conspirators had developed a sophisticated system for identifying potential targets. They looked for black women who had achieved prominence in their fields: doctors, lawyers, executives, educators. The more successful the woman, the more likely she was to be targeted. They saw successful black women as threats, Maya explained to her team during their evening briefing. Each conviction sent a message: stay in your place, or this could happen to you. But now the tables had turned. Every day brought new evidence, new witnesses, new cooperating defendants eager to save themselves by exposing others. The corrupt network was falling apart. In the prison visitation room, Maya interviewed Judge Harrison one last time. The once powerful judge now wore an orange jumpsuit, his arrogance replaced by desperate anger. You've destroyed everything, he spat at her. Maya leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. No, Judge Harrison, you destroyed lives. You used your power to punish innocent women for their success. I'm just making sure justice finally works the way it should. As she left the prison, Maya received another update. The governor had just announced a special commission to review every case handled by Harrison and his corrupt network. Preliminary findings suggested that over 400 convictions might need to be overturned. Back in her office, Maya added more photos to the wall, women whose lives had been destroyed by corruption but who would soon taste freedom again. Dr. Williams would be released next week. Angela Baker had already been cleared and was planning to sue the city. Lisa Jackson would get her medical license back. It's not just about catching the bad guys, Maya told her team as they prepared to serve another round of warrants. It's about fixing a broken system. Every corrupt officer we arrest, every crooked judge we expose, brings us one step closer to real justice. And we're just getting started. 6 months after the dramatic courthouse arrests, Maya Thompson stood on the same steps where she had once been led away in handcuffs. This time, she wore her FBI badge openly as she watched Judge Harrison, officers Plant and Reynolds, and 9 other corrupt officials being escorted to prison transport vehicles. The morning sun caught the metal of their handcuffs, a fitting symbol of justice finally served. All rise, called the bailiff in the federal courtroom earlier that morning. The jury had taken just 4 hours to reach their verdict, guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison had received 30 years. Blant and Reynolds each got 25. Their corrupt empire had crumbled completely. But for Maya, the real victory wasn't just putting corrupt officials behind bars. It was watching the women they had wrongfully convicted walking free. Dr. Lisa Jackson had performed her first surgery since being reinstated at Memorial Hospital. Angela Baker was now running her own bank. Each woman they had tried to destroy was rising again, stronger than before. Agent Thompson called a voice. Maya turned to see Patricia Williams, the former surgeon she'd helped free, running up the courthouse steps. "I just finished my first week back at work. The hospital board cleared me completely." Maya hugged her, remembering how Dr. Williams had looked in prison just months ago. Now she stood tall, confident again, her medical license restored and her reputation cleared. "How does it feel to be back in the operating room?" "Like coming home," Patricia smiled, happy tears in her eyes. "My first patient was a young girl who wants to be a doctor. I told her about you, about how one person can change the whole system if they're brave enough." Reporters gathered around as more former victims arrived. Each had a story of renewal, of rebuilding what corruption had tried to destroy. Maya's investigation had led to 412 convictions being overturned. The state had already paid out millions in compensation, with more cases pending. Agent Thompson, a young reporter, called out, "What's next for your task force?" Maya stepped up to the microphones. Behind her stood her entire team, Sarah Chen, Weber, and dozens of FBI agents who had worked tirelessly to expose the truth. But more importantly, beside her stood the women who had survived the corrupt system's worst attacks. "Today isn't the end," Maya announced clearly. "It's a beginning. We've created a new civil rights enforcement division, staffed by some of the very women who were wrongfully convicted. Who better to spot corruption than those who survived it?" She gestured to the group behind her. "Dr. Jackson will lead our medical investigations unit. Ms. Baker is training our financial crimes team. Every woman here brings unique expertise and an unwavering commitment to justice. We're not just fighting corruption, we're changing how the system works." The changes were already visible. The governor had appointed a reform commission led by formerly incarcerated women. Police departments across the state were undergoing mandatory bias training. A new oversight board, independent of the judicial system, would review any case where discrimination was suspected. As the crowd dispersed, Maya walked through the courthouse halls one last time. The building felt different now, cleaner, more hopeful. In Judge Harrison's former courtroom, a new judge was being sworn in. Judge Michelle Carter, an African-American woman who had spent 20 years defending civil rights. "Ready for your new assignment?" Sarah Chen asked, joining Maya by the window. Maya nodded, watching as more corrupt officials were led out to waiting vehicles. "We've already received requests from 3 other states to investigate similar patterns. This was never just about Harrison City." That evening, Maya visited the FBI Training Academy, where she now taught a special course on corruption investigations. Her students included women from all backgrounds, each determined to protect the justice system from those who would abuse it. "The most dangerous corrupt officials," Maya told her class, "are the ones who think they're untouchable. They target people they think won't fight back, won't be believed. Our job is to prove them wrong." She looked out at the eager faces before her and saw the future. A justice system protected by people who understood both its power and its responsibility. The corrupt judge and officers had never expected her to be an FBI agent. Now, thanks to their own arrogance, they had helped create an army of investigators determined to follow in her footsteps. "Remember," Maya concluded, "true justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent, restoring what was stolen, and making sure the system works for everyone, not just those with power. That's the lesson we learned, and that's the legacy we'll build together." The sun set over the courthouse, its light catching the words carved above the entrance. "Equal justice under law." For the first time in years, Maya believed those words might finally be true.